She laughed when I quietly placed the ring on the table. Not a nervous laugh. Not the kind people use when they do not understand what is happening. It was sharp, amused, almost relieved, as if I had finally done something she had been waiting for me to do. For a second, neither of us moved. The kitchen light was warm, too warm for that kind of moment. It made everything look softer than it was. The white quartz counter, her wine glass, the little gold band lying between us like it weighed nothing. I remember thinking how strange that was. 12 years of marriage, and in the end it looked smaller than a loose coin. She leaned back against the counter, folded her arms, and smiled at me as if I were being dramatic. "So that's it?" she asked. I nodded once. "That's it." She gave a short laugh and looked away, already bored. "You always did know how to make things awkward." I did not answer. There was nothing left to defend, explain, or fix. I had spent too many nights doing all three in my head, while she came home late with perfume that was not hers to wear for me, with tired excuses, with that practiced look of irritation people use when they want you to feel guilty for noticing. I picked up my keys from the table. That was when her phone lit up. She glanced down, typed something quickly, and smirked. I did not ask who she was texting. I did not need to. By then, I had learned that the truth usually arrived on its own, without being chased. 20 minutes later, sitting alone in my truck outside the house, I saw her story. A photo of the ring on the table. My ring. Caption: "Guess he finally quit," face with tears of joy. I stared at it for a long time. Then I watched the likes begin to climb. Co-workers, friends, people who had eaten at our table, smiled at me, shaken my hand. By midnight, there were comments. By morning, my name was everywhere. Just not in the way she expected. Before that night, everything looked normal from the outside. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Phoenix, the kind of place where nothing really changes unless someone decides to leave. Same trimmed lawns, same morning routines, same neighbors waving from their driveways as if time itself had agreed to slow down there. It was the kind of life people describe as stable, predictable, good. I worked at a small auto shop about 20 minutes from home. Nothing glamorous, but steady. I knew my customers, knew their cars, knew the rhythm of each week without needing to check a calendar. It paid the bills. It kept things moving. She worked at a marketing agency downtown. Bigger world. Faster pace. Different hours. At least, that's how it started. In the beginning, her late nights made sense. New campaigns, demanding clients, deadlines that seemed to shift without warning. She would come home tired, drop her bag by the door, and talk just enough to make it all sound real. I listened. I believed her. That's what you do when you trust someone. You don't audit their life. Over time, the details became thinner. Just work. Just meetings. Just a quick trip. Nothing big. The explanations shortened, but the absences grew. There were small things too. Charges on the account that didn't match anything we talked about. Dresses I hadn't seen before, still with tags tucked inside the closet. Hotel confirmations forwarded to our shared email. Explained away before I even had the chance to ask. I noticed. Of course I noticed. But I told myself there were reasonable answers. That I was overthinking. That relationships require space, and trust, and the ability to ignore the occasional inconsistency without turning it into something larger. So I didn't check. I didn't scroll through her phone while she was in the shower. I didn't question every late return or every quiet dinner. I didn't follow the trail, even when it began to form right in front of me. It's strange how easy it is to cooperate with your own blindness when the alternative threatens everything you've built. Looking back, nothing about it was sudden. It was gradual, quiet, layered, each unexplained detail resting on top of the last, forming something I could have seen clearly if I had chosen to step back and look at the whole picture. But I didn't. I stayed where I was, inside the version of our life that still felt intact, even as it was slowly being replaced by something else entirely. The shift didn't come with a confrontation. It didn't need one. It started with a charge. A private villa, 3 nights, paid in full. Not a business expense. Not something that could be folded into client entertainment or agency retreat without raising questions. The amount was precise, deliberate, and recent. I remember the date because it sat exactly on top of one of her last-minute work trips. I didn't react. I didn't even move at first. I just looked at it, the same way you look at something fragile, carefully, as if sudden movement might change what you're seeing. Later that same week, Someone from the shop mentioned her name without realizing who I was. We were standing near the open bay, the afternoon heat rolling in, tools scattered around us in the usual disorganized order that made sense to everyone except outsiders. He was talking about a restaurant downtown. Said he'd seen a couple there a few nights earlier. Guy looked like money, he said casually. Older. Confident. The woman, marketing type, I think. Someone said her name was. He said her name. He didn't notice the pause that followed. Didn't notice how quiet I became, how the background noise of the shop seemed to flatten into something distant and mechanical. And she wasn't alone? I asked, keeping my voice even. He shook his head. No, definitely not. That was enough. I didn't ask what they were doing. I didn't ask how they looked together. I didn't need details. The shape of it had already formed. That night, when she came home, everything felt different, not because anything had changed, but because I finally saw it without the filter I had been holding in place for so long. She moved the same way, set her bag down, kicked off her shoes, gave me a brief smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Long day, she said. I nodded. Yeah. We ate dinner across from each other, the conversation thin, functional. Every word she said fit into place too neatly, like it had been rehearsed. And maybe it had, or maybe I was only noticing it now. Either way, the pattern was clear. Every late night, every quiet phone call taken in another room, every trip that came together too quickly to question. It wasn't random. It wasn't coincidence. It was a second life, and I had been standing just outside of it, close enough to feel its edges, but far enough to pretend it wasn't there. If you've made it this far, this story clearly caught your attention. If you're enjoying it, drop a like on the video. It helps me see what kind of stories you want more of next. Let's keep going. That was the moment things settled. Not emotionally, not yet, but factually. There was nothing left to figure out. Only something left to accept. I didn't confront her. That was the part that would have surprised most people. No raised voices, no accusations thrown across the room, no late-night demands for explanations that would only lead to carefully constructed lies. I had already heard enough without her saying a word. Something in me had shifted too far for that. I stopped trying to understand. That was the first real change. Not outwardly. Nothing visible. Nothing she could point to and question. But internally, everything had already begun to detach. The need to confirm, to argue, to fix, it all went quiet. I didn't check her phone. I didn't follow her when she said she was working late. I didn't sit awake waiting for the sound of her car in the driveway. Instead, I began to notice the silence in myself. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something cleaner than that. A kind of stillness that comes when a decision has already been made, even if it hasn't been spoken out loud. She didn't see it. Or if she did, she didn't recognize it for what it was. We moved through the house the same way we always had. Shared the same spaces. Passed each other in the hallway. Sat across from one another at dinner, exchanging small, practical sentences about groceries, schedules, things that didn't matter. You'll be home late? I asked one evening. Yeah. Big client. She replied, not looking up from her phone. I nodded. Okay. That was it. No follow-up. No hesitation. She paused, just slightly. I noticed it. That brief moment where she expected something more. Some resistance. Some question she could dismiss. Some small friction to justify the story she had already prepared. But it didn't come. And that absence seemed to settle something in her. She relaxed. Continued typing. The conversation ended before it had even begun. That became the pattern. The less I asked, the easier everything became for her. And the clearer everything became for me. I started to understand that whatever existed between us before, whatever version of us had once required honesty, effort, or even basic respect, was already gone. It just hadn't been formally acknowledged yet. Not by her, but by me it had. I was no longer inside the relationship. I was observing it. Living in the same house, following the same routines, but no longer participating in the meaning behind them. It was like staying seated at a table after the conversation had ended, simply because no one had stood up first. At some point, I realized something else. Leaving emotionally comes before leaving physically. And by then, I was already gone. Once I stopped asking questions, I started watching. Not in a paranoid way. Not pacing the house, or checking locks, or trying to catch her in something dramatic. It was quieter than that. More methodical. Like stepping back and finally allowing the full picture to come into focus without interrupting it. I paid attention to patterns. The time she left. The time she returned. The way her tone shifted depending on who she thought she was speaking to. The small inconsistencies that used to pass unnoticed now stood out with a kind of clarity that was almost clinical. Her phone would buzz, and she would glance at it. Not the way you look at a message, but the way you confirm something expected. Then she'd stand, casually, as if the movement had nothing to do with the notification. "Just need to take this," she'd say, already halfway into the other room. The door wouldn't close completely. Just enough. At night, the GPS in the car began to tell its own version of her routine. Places she never mentioned. Streets that didn't lead to her office or any client she had ever talked about. At first, I told myself there could still be explanations. But explanations require consistency. And there was none. I began recording things, not obsessively, not every moment, but enough. Short fragments of conversations when she thought she was alone. Names. Times. References that didn't belong to the life we shared. Over time, the pieces stopped feeling separate. They connected. What I had first understood as an affair revealed itself as something more structured, more established. This wasn't new. It hadn't just happened. It had been developing alongside our life, quietly, deliberately, until it became its own complete system. A second routine. A second version of her. And in that version, I didn't exist. One evening, I watched her through the front window as she sat in her car for a few extra seconds before coming inside. She was smiling at her phone, softly, naturally. Not the controlled expression she brought into the house, but something unguarded, something real. When she stepped inside, that expression was gone. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "Hey," I replied. Same tone, same distance. But now I understood the difference. The version of her that lived outside this house, that was the one she chose. This, what she left for me, was what remained. And by then, I wasn't trying to reclaim it anymore. I was just documenting what it actually was. At some point, it stopped being just about us. That realization didn't come all at once. It came in fragments, the same way everything else had. A word here, a name repeated too often, numbers that didn't belong to personal conversations. It was subtle, but consistent enough to shift the context of everything I had already seen. The first time I heard his name clearly was on a recording I almost didn't keep. "Derek said not to send that yet," she whispered, her voice low, controlled. "We wait until after the meeting. Then it looks clean." There was a pause. I could hear movement, the faint sound of a door closing somewhere on her end. "No, it's already in place," she continued. "They won't notice until it's too late." I replayed that part more than once. Not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to be certain I wasn't misinterpreting something that could still be explained in a normal way. But the tone didn't match normal work. Neither did the caution, or the timing. After that, I started paying closer attention to what was being said, not just where she went or who she saw, but the substance behind it. There were mentions of contracts that didn't align with her role, references to accounts she had never discussed, numbers that were too precise, too intentional to be casual conversation. And always, Derek somewhere in the middle of it. Her boss. Or at least, that's what he was supposed to be. The more I listened, the clearer it became that whatever they were involved in extended beyond office hours, beyond professional boundaries, beyond anything that could be explained as ambition or workplace pressure. It had structure, coordination, purpose, and she wasn't on the outside of it. She was part of it. One evening, she came home earlier than usual. I was sitting in the living room, going through receipts, not hiding what I was doing, but not drawing attention to it either. "Why are you looking at those?" she asked, her tone light but careful. "Just organizing things," I said. She watched me for a second longer than necessary, then nodded. "You don't have to worry about all that." I met her eyes briefly. I know. That was enough to make her look away. It was a small moment, but it confirmed something important. She didn't expect me to see the larger picture. In her mind, whatever was happening existed in a space I wasn't equipped to enter. And for a while, she had been right. But not anymore. By then, I wasn't just observing a relationship that had ended. I was looking at something else entirely. Something that carried consequences far beyond the two of us. And unlike everything before, this wasn't something I could simply walk away from without understanding exactly what it was. She tried to talk to me the morning after she posted the ring. I was at the kitchen table, the same place where I had set it down the night before. The surface had already been wiped clean. No trace of it. Just the faint outline in my memory of where it had rested, as if that mattered. She stood across from me, holding her phone, scrolling for a second before locking the screen. "You're really going to act like this?" she asked. I looked up. "Like what?" She exhaled, shifting her weight. "Like it's some kind of final decision." It was a joke. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence sit between us, long enough for her to feel it, but not long enough to turn it into something dramatic. "A joke," I repeated. "Yeah," she said quickly. "I mean, you put the ring down like that. What was I supposed to think?" It was weird. I just posted it. People do that. I nodded once. People do a lot of things. She frowned slightly, trying to read something in my face that wasn't there anymore. "You're overreacting," she continued. "Seriously, you could have just talked to me instead of making it whatever this is." "I am talking to you," I said. "No, you're not," she snapped, then caught herself, softening her tone. "You're just sitting there, like you've already decided something." I held her gaze, calm, steady. "I have." That was the moment she paused. Not because she understood everything, but because she realized she wasn't controlling the direction of the conversation anymore. She was waiting for frustration, for anger, for something she could push against and reshape. But it didn't come. "So what? That's it?" she asked, echoing her words from the night before, but without the same confidence. "That's it," I said. She let out a small, disbelieving laugh. "You're being dramatic." "Maybe." Another pause. Her eyes searched mine again, slower this time. Careful. As if she was finally noticing the absence of something she had relied on for years. The need I used to have to explain myself to her, to justify every decision until it made sense to both of us. That need was gone. "You'll calm down," she said, more to herself than to me. "We'll figure this out later." I didn't respond. She picked up her bag, hesitated for a second, then walked toward the door. "Don't do anything stupid," she added, almost casually. The door closed behind her. I stayed where I was, listening to the quiet settle back into the house. There was no anger, no second thoughts, just clarity, and the understanding that whatever she was expecting from me, whatever version of me she thought would still be there when she got back, was already gone. After that, I didn't push anything forward. I didn't need to. By then, everything had already been set in motion, quietly, carefully, without urgency. The kind of process that doesn't rely on emotion, only on sequence. Information collected, organized, verified. Dates aligned. Transactions matched. Names connected in ways that didn't require interpretation anymore. I knew where it needed to go, and I knew better than to rush it. The first responses came slowly. Not from her, not from anyone close, but from places that don't react. They proceed. Formal emails. Requests for clarification. Follow-ups that didn't sound personal, because they weren't. I didn't answer everything at once. I let the process unfold the way it was designed to. A few days later, I noticed the shift. Her tone changed on the phone. Sharper. Less controlled. "I told you. That wasn't supposed to go out yet," she said one evening, pacing in the hallway, unaware I could hear every word. "No, you said it was covered. That's what you said." A pause. "I don't care what they're asking. Just handle it." That was the first crack. After that, things began to surface more openly. Not in dramatic ways, not overnight, but steadily. Questions turned into reviews. Reviews into investigations. Names that had stayed inside private conversations started appearing in places where they couldn't be contained anymore. Derek's name came up first. Not loudly, not publicly, just enough to circulate among the right people. Then others. Contracts were examined. Timelines questioned. Decisions that once looked routine were pulled apart and looked at again, this time without the assumption that everything had been done correctly. She noticed. Of course she did. The late nights didn't stop, but they changed. Less confidence. More urgency. Calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Messages sent faster, shorter, without the same controlled rhythm she used to maintain. One evening, she stood in the kitchen again, staring at her phone longer than usual. "They're overreacting," she said, not looking at me. I didn't respond. "It's just internal review," she added. "Happens all the time." "Does it?" I asked evenly. She hesitated. "Yes." I nodded once and returned to what I was doing. That was all. But by then, the narrative she had been holding together was no longer stable. Too many external points had begun to press against it. Too many questions that didn't come from me. And somewhere in the middle of all that, her post, the one with the ring, was still there. Still visible. Only now, it didn't read the same way. The comments had changed. The tone had shifted. What once looked like a joke was starting to look like something else entirely. I didn't follow the news closely. I didn't need to. It found me anyway. At first, it came in fragments. Headlines that didn't mention her name directly, but circled close enough to be familiar. Phrases like internal misconduct, financial irregularities, executive oversight. The kind of language designed to sound controlled, even when the situation behind it wasn't. I recognized the structure of it immediately. Careful, measured, inevitable. At the shop, someone had the radio on while we worked. Midday update. A brief segment about a marketing firm under investigation. No names yet, just references to leadership and ongoing review. Sounds messy, one of the guys said, wiping his hands on a rag. Usually is, I replied. That was the extent of it. By the end of the week, the details became clearer. Not all at once, but enough to connect what I already knew with what was being confirmed publicly. Derek's name surfaced first, attached to decisions that didn't hold up under scrutiny. Then the rest followed. Contracts re-examined, timelines questioned, access logs reviewed. Nothing dramatic. Just fact after fact, placed in order. At home, the atmosphere shifted completely. She stopped explaining things. Not because everything was fine, but because there was too much to explain. The confidence she once carried into every conversation had been replaced by something tighter, more controlled. Not panic. She was too careful for that. But strain. You've seen this? She asked one evening, holding her phone out slightly, not fully offering it. I glanced at the screen. An article. Her company's name in bold. I've seen enough, I said. She studied my face, searching again for something familiar. Concern, maybe. Support. A reaction she could align herself with. But there was nothing there for her to use. They're making it sound worse than it is, she said. I nodded. That happens. Another pause. They don't have anything concrete, she added, more firmly this time. I looked at her calm. They will. That was when she looked away. After that, we spoke less. Not out of avoidance, but because there was no longer a shared version of reality to maintain. She was dealing with something that was closing in from the outside. I had already stepped outside of it. Days passed. Then more headlines. More confirmations. Names that had been protected by distance were now attached directly to decisions, to actions, to consequences. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing in it for me to celebrate. I just watched as everything that had been carefully constructed, both inside our home and beyond it, began to settle into its final shape. And when it didn't collapse all at once. It simply stopped holding. Sometimes I think about that moment with the ring. Not the post. Not the comments. Just the way it looked on the table, small, ordinary, almost insignificant. After everything we had built, everything we had moved through together, it came down to that quiet gesture and her laughter. That was the real ending. Everything after that was just time catching up with it. The investigations, the headlines, the conversations that stopped mid-sentence when I entered the room. They all belonged to a process that didn't need me anymore. What was meant to surface, surfaced. What was meant to fall, fell. I didn't stay to watch it closely. I moved out within a week. Packed only what was mine. Left the rest exactly where it had always been. No notes. No explanations. There was nothing left that required either. The house felt different the last time I walked through it. Not empty, just quiet in a way that made sense. I closed the door without looking back. Now, when I think about it, I don't focus on what she did or what came after. I think about how long I stayed before I understood what was already over. And I wonder, how many endings look quiet at first, before they become impossible to ignore. That's the end of this story. If you made it all the way here, consider subscribing to stay with us. I've placed a couple of recommended videos on screen for you. Pick one and keep watching. I'll see you in the next story.